Hello, I'm Mr. Hepp, and welcome to U.S. History. We are continuing to study the Revolutionary War. We're on chapter 6.4, Winning Independence, and what I have listed here are some of the items that we're going to be discussing as we move along with this video. I won't go through them all. You can pause them if you wish to look at them. I also have a timeline here of what we've learned so far, kind of a summary. It's kind of hard to get all the points that we've talked about for the first half of the year. But again, if you want to take a look, go ahead and pause and then go forward. On this slide is part two. In the bold black print is what some of the battles of the Revolutionary War that we've studied so far. And in the blue is what we're going to be talking about right now. Okay, just to kind of review a little bit, some of the major battles we've talked about is the Battle of Lexington and Concord. This is where the first shot heard around the world. No one knows who fired the first shot. Then secondly, we had the Battle of Bunker Hill, a 3-day battle where the English had to run up a hill and we kept shooting at them. And basically we lost because we ran out of ammunition. A favorite saying called, "Don't fire till they see the whites of their eyes," meaning wait till they get close enough so we don't run out of ammo, that we make sure we hit somebody. But America lost that battle. After George Washington drove them out of Boston with some cannons from Fort Ticonderoga, the British Army went to New York, and Washington followed them, and they had a battle. Washington was losing badly and snuck away at night in the cover of fog and rain and went west to Pennsylvania. Okay. The next battle was the Battle of Trenton. This was on Christmas Day against the Hessian soldiers in Trenton. It was kind of a surprise attack early in the morning, and this is the famous Washington crossing the Delaware at night. Okay, and this was important because the 6-month contract that many soldiers had, enlistment contract, was about to run out, and we hadn't really had any success. And so Washington knew we needed a win to get the soldiers to reenlist, and they did that, and they were able to go forward. One of the biggest battles and turning points in the war was the battle at Saratoga, where England had a three-pronged plan to meet at Albany. And what they wanted to do was get control of the Hudson River and cut off the New England colonies from the middle and the southern colonies. They thought they could do that and interrupt their supply chain, that they would win the war. They did not win that battle, and it was very key because this encouraged the French and the Spanish to come into the war. They thought that the Americans could win, so they have provided assistance with leaders, money, ships, and ammunition and weapons. After this, you can take a look at the map here. The battles all pretty much in the northern part of America. So what we're going to pick up right now is kind of a change in strategy for the English. They decided to go down south, and they were going to land in Georgia, and they were going to work their way up the America from the bottom, going from south to north, hoping that they could get support of the loyalists that they had there and work their way back up to the north and defeat the Americans. One of the battles we'll be studying is the Battle of Kings Mountain, along with the Battle of Cowpens, and then the final battle of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Yorktown, at Yorktown, Virginia, where General Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington. Okay, so here's where we start, our overview. After they failed to cut supply lines of the Hudson River, the Battle of Saratoga, they decided to invade and capture the South. Okay, so what they did is they kind of look at the map and said, all right, let's go down to the South. And what they wanted to do was capture one city after another, one colony after another, and keep moving north. So the first place they landed and captured was Savannah, Georgia. And they successfully did that. And they marched north then to Charleston, and they successfully captured Charleston, North Carolina. Okay, South Carolina. And one of the things that we mentioned that they felt that was going to help them was in the South. They felt that there were a lot of loyalists loyal to England, and that they would help them, and they would start using them to plan guerrilla conflicts. The English soldiers were not very good at fighting guerrilla battles, and what would happen here is this was going to be a lot of patriots versus loyalists fighting against each other. Okay, one of the people that were very famous American fighters down in the South at this time, one of the leaders, is named Francis Marion. He was excellent at guerrilla warfare tactics, leading his men through swamps, and he was so good at this, his nickname became the Swamp Fox. Okay, and he would lead them into battle, make the English chase him into swampy, marshy areas, wooded areas, and he and his men had a distinct advantage over them and would often beat larger numbers of British soldiers. And here's just a picture of them standing behind the trees, waiting for the British soldiers to appear, and then just shoot and pick them off as they come by. Okay. So as things began to turn in America's favor, though, one of the battles that was key is a battle called the Battle of Kings Mountain, and this was fought in North and South Carolina, where they come together at the border, just under the border of North Carolina, right on the top there, South Carolina. You can see that where it splits. And one of the reasons that this was such a big and important war is this was very much a battle between patriots for supporting the American independence and loyalists supporting British rule. And until the Civil War, this Battle of Kings Mountain was the largest American versus American battle that we had. And there were British soldiers that did fight in this, but it was mostly patriots versus loyalists. The patriots did win, which was a huge, significant victory for the Americans. This is kind of just a landscape of the countryside of Kings Mountain. Okay, you can see this in the valley where most of the fighting would have taken place. About this time, a gentleman that we talked about earlier in the chapter, Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was a hero of the Battle of Saratoga, and also the gentleman who attacked Fort Ticonderoga and got the cannons that were taken to Boston that George Washington used to drive Boston out of the city of Boston. So he was very, very famous, very well liked, but he was unhappy. He thought he was being passed over for promotions, thought he should be higher up than what he was. And what he did then is he ended up becoming a traitor to our country. Okay, and what he did involved the Training Academy of West Point. So on our map here, here's New York. Okay, we had the Battle of Long Island. Up here is Fort Ticonderoga, where he got his cannons and sent them to Boston. This is the Battle of Saratoga, which he was a part of, which we won, which is the most important war up to this time. A three-pronged plan, control the Hudson. Okay, and then down here in southern New York is West Point. Now, for those of you familiar with West Point, this is where our Army cadets get training. This is an aerial photograph of the academy as it looks today. Okay, and here's a picture of some of the cadets in the gray uniforms. Okay, and this is also where our Army soldiers and officers are trained. Okay, now on this next slide, I'm not going to have you read everything on the right. You can pause that and look at that if you want. But a traitor here is a person who betrays his or her country and causes help to the other side. So what happened was he was feeling like he wasn't being treated fairly, so he gave information to the English of where West Point was, so they could come and attack. You know, of course, this is where you're training your soldiers and your officers. Obviously, this is a very important place. Okay, and so Benedict Arnold ended up going to England and fighting for England against the Americans. He lived all his life in England, and Benedict Arnold. The term now, if you call somebody a Benedict Arnold, you're basically calling them a traitor. And ironically, at this time, West Point was actually named Fort Arnold, okay, in reference to Benedict Arnold. Of course, after he became a traitor, they renamed the fort. Okay, a couple different names. Now it's West Point. One of the last battles in the South, one of the major turning point battles in the South was the Battle of Cowpens. Okay, this was also in South Carolina. Okay, right down there. And again, this is close to the North Carolina border. Okay, and the reason that this one was a big one is this one you had a lot of Patriots leaders going against the leader of the British Army. Now, the leader of the British Army this time was General George Cornwallis. Okay, and the Americans were Major Nathaniel Greene and General Daniel Morgan. Nathaniel Greene is probably the most famous of the two. They went head to head, and Nathaniel Greene and Morgan joined their forces together, and they pretty much destroyed the British forces. They killed a lot of British soldiers. They took very few casualties themselves, and it forced the English to go off to the east and kind of put them on the run. Okay, and as with the Saratoga is the most important battle of the North, this is the turning point in the South Revolutionary War because the tide is starting to turn. The Patriots are fighting much better in the South than the British expected. They're not getting as much help from the Loyalists as they wanted, and so now they're kind of on the run. This slide here kind of shows a map. Here's Cowpens, South Carolina, and if they had to march to Yorktown, Virginia. And it's about 404 miles, okay, 132 hours to walk. So it's kind of a trip. But they had to come to Yorktown, but they were running out of supplies at this time, and they needed to be restocked with ships bringing supplies, food, and ammunition. So they end up in Yorktown, Virginia, okay, and Morgan and Greene, they keep chasing. They're not letting up. Okay, so they're following this British army all the way back, keeping Cornwallis and his army on the run. Okay, so they get to Yorktown, Virginia. Okay, got a couple slides here that show where it's located. You can see it's kind of on a bay. All right, and they're just sitting there waiting. There's a couple of ships there, but you can see they're waiting. This is on the James River, which may be familiar. Okay, but they're waiting for supply ships to come and replenish all their supplies. Okay, in the meantime, General Washington and one of his other generals, General Lafayette, who came from France, each are controlling armies, and they're each coming down from the north to the south. They hear that Cornwallis is in Yorktown, so Washington is coming down from the northwest. General Lafayette is coming down more from the north. Okay, they're going to meet at Yorktown along with some other officers. Okay, now here's where Yorktown is. You see the British flag. There's where the British soldiers are. Okay, and they're surrounded by the Americans. There's Lafayette, Baron von Steuben, a couple other French officers with military personnel along with Washington. They're surrounding it and laying siege. Okay, not letting supplies in or out. Now, what really made this go, we said they're waiting for the supplies from the English ships. Well, this is where the French Navy comes in and helps us out a great deal. The French Navy came, and the circles that are coming up around those ships are the French Navy. They sink those ships I showed you that were in the harbor, and they also border off all of the ships going in and out through the James River. So basically, they're going to starve out the British soldiers there. So this goes on for about 3 weeks, and Cornwallis says he has enough. Go back here, and he decides to surrender, and effectively ending the war after 6 years. This is in 1781. Okay, so we've been fighting for 6 years. On October 19th, 1781, the British soldiers formally declare that they've surrendered, and they walk through two lines, one of French soldiers, one of American soldiers. Okay, and as they walk through, the Americans poked and made fun of the British. I think one of the songs they sang was Yankee Doodle Dandy, and I believe we'll talk about some years later in the War of 1812, when we fight the British again. Okay, and they did some things to kind of get back at us for making fun of them. This leads to the Treaty of Paris. Okay, and my question is, I'm going a little fast, I'll come back, is didn't we already have a Treaty of Paris? Well, two things. Yes, we did already have one. It was in 1763, and it was at the end of the French and Indian War. Okay, and what we did is we split the United States, or what will become the United States, we split America in half. England had taken everything east of the Mississippi River, and Spain was given everything west of the Mississippi River, along with the Florida. Okay, so basically, what happens is 20 years later, the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Okay, second thing is, like I said, our forefathers, great people, but not very creative. Went to Paris for the first treaty, went to Paris for the second one, called it the same thing. Okay, 2 different years. But basically, the only thing that changes is who controls what. Right now, instead of England controlling the land east of the Mississippi, we have the United States, America. We control the land now. England is not involved. Spain still controls the land west of the Mississippi. So geographically, the boundaries are the same. It's just that we're taking over the land that England had controlled. So we're still going to deal with Spain. Several things that came out of the Treaty of Paris of 1783. It officially ended the Revolutionary War. Okay, was signed by France, Britain, and the United States in 1783. Britain formally recognized us as an independent nation. So that means they couldn't tax us anymore. Okay, they had to trade with us as equal partners. And they agreed to remove troops from the new nation. Okay, keep an eye on this one because this doesn't happen and it leads to a source of issue as we go forward. Okay, I said we'd finish up here with reasons why America won the Revolutionary War, and there's 6 of them, and these will be on our test. So I thought we'd cover them here. 1, we had home field advantage, huge. We knew where to go, where we were at. Think about it. The British came over. They were stationed in cities like Boston and Philadelphia. They didn't know the landscape. We did a great job of just running around and making them chase us. And eventually they got kind of tired of doing that. Number two was guerrilla warfare tactics that we learned from the French and Native Americans in the French and Indian War 20 years earlier. Okay, very helpful to us. Number three, from the Battle of Saratoga, why that's so important. France got France to come into the war. They gave us money, weapons, and their navy to help us. Number four, the loyalists. There were several loyalists. We think about 1/3 of Americans were loyalists, supportive of England, but they were very scared. Many of them were getting involved because you had brothers shooting against brothers, families against families. It was very politically charged. So a lot of them thought they just would keep quiet and not pick sides. Also, back at home in England, it wasn't really felt that they should keep fighting this war. A lot of people there thought that England should let America be independent and let them be their own country. It was again costing them a lot of money. We talked earlier about how much England was in war debt and kept taxing Americans in the first place. And they felt just let it go. We can trade with them and make money that way. We don't have to have our military there and have them as a colony. So support for the war in England was beginning to wane tremendously. And then lastly, the British arrogance of their military superiority led to making kind of some not very good military decisions, whether it was at the Battle of Saratoga or coming up from the south on getting trapped without having supplies. They kind of spread their army out at times, and they kind of felt that they didn't really give the Americans enough credit. The Americans had a lot of good leaders developed at this time and a lot of good fighting strategies, and they kind of were overconfident in what they were doing. So a lot of the things they planned out ended up being not good decisions by their officers. So that's kind of the top six there. And then I'm going to finish with this slide. This is our winning independence. Again, what we talked about, we've reviewed all of these. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them. You can pause these and look at them if you want, but we've covered all of these. And these will be on your test. Okay. And we'll finish up here. The Revolutionary War is done in 1781. And we'll start covering now. Now that we've won, we've got to learn to govern ourselves. And that's not going to prove to be so easy. Okay, so we're going to talk about life after the Revolutionary War with our next chapter. Thank you much for listening. Good luck with the Edpuzzle.